Okay, welcome. Uh,
Oh,
and let me give a brief introduction of myself, and then I'll also introduce our esteemed speaker, Mr. Gen Kanai. So my name is Ben. I'll be the moderator for this session. I'm an assistant professor of finance at the National University of Singapore. I did my PhD in finance at the University of Chicago. My research now is in financial technology, and the thing that's more interesting to me is financial regulation. So as the technology in this space and Web3 has come in raging and has grown really fast, it's raised a couple of interesting existential questions in the industry. And I have a great pleasure today to be speaking with Mr. Gen Kanai. Please let me know if I butchered your name. I'm sorry if that's the case.
that's correct. Thank you.
Um, Gen is the Director of Strategic Partnerships at Animoca Brands. In his role on the partnerships, he helps to manage M&A as well as the investments for the company. He has a broad range of experience from product management, business development, evangelism, and a lot of investor education, community development in Asia, with particular experience to the Japan market. In his previous role, he was a Director of Asia Community Engagement at Mozilla. So Gen is a veteran of the tech industry. So, we can't look down on Web 1, 2, although we're at Web 3 now, but, the path was laid the way by, the everyone who came before. So Gen has been with Animoca for a while now. He has extensive experience with Mozilla all around Southeast Asia. He's also active in the US Japan Leadership Program as well as Asia's Society of 21 Young Leaders Program. He's an active mentor in the SOSV China Accelerator as well as MOX Accelerator program. So again, you must spend a lot of time talking about all kinds of startups and young people about this new technology that we're dealing with here. Maybe could I ask you, please, for a brief introduction of the company as well as how you go about thinking about investments and partnerships?
Certainly. Thank you, Ben, and thank you, SCB10X, for this opportunity. For a quick introduction to Animoca Brands, essentially, Animoca Brands started out as a mobile games development studio and publisher, and the company had a number of hit products early on, and was doing very well. The chairman of the company saw the success of CryptoKitties in 2017 and decided to pivot the company towards whatever that was. I mean, at the time, that was the only game on blockchain, but he really felt that that model of gaming would become very important, and indeed it has. So since then, the company has developed numerous blockchain games that we own and operate ourselves. Probably most prominently is the Sandbox. And we have over 150 investments in the blockchain and blockchain gaming space. Some of our most prominent investments are we led the Series A in Sky Mavis, the company that runs Axie Infinity. We're a very early investor in Dapper Labs, the team that makes NBA Top Shot, and a very early investor in OpenSea. And then our own company as well received, we've raised over close to $600 million in multiple rounds last year and this year, and now have a valuation of over $5 billion. So we're both an owner-operator of blockchain games and an investor in the segment.
Okay, so thank you for the background. And so maybe could I ask, as a company that originally started as game publishing, as now it's expanded, and you can see that you're working with some of the startups are fairly young, I assume, inside your investment portfolio. Some kind of have a proven record of a big user base and so on. You've transitioned from a traditional game company into a blockchain-based or blockchain-focused company. How has the transition been? Because, Blockbuster never made the leap to become something like Netflix. right? And so could you share your experience in terms of, where the knowledge of distributing games, in the old world actually may help some of the new companies now?
Certainly. A number of things happened, actually before I joined, but led our chairman to choose this new path of blockchain gaming. There was an experience where the company almost went bankrupt because the company at that time, this is, I want to say, early 2010s, I think, or maybe even mid 2010s, the company had dozens and dozens of games in the Apple App Store. Was one of the largest, had one of the largest portfolios of games in the App Store, and all of a sudden, Apple decided to take all the games down for whatever reason, and the company then had to, negotiate with Apple to figure out what the issues were, and then get the games back up on the App Store, and all the while paying 30% of the revenue to Apple. And I think that experience where the company could have gone under, all because of sort of seemingly arbitrary decisions in California, was a real wake-up call. And so when the model arrived where one can build and operate a game in a decentralized fashion on the blockchain, without the need of an app store, without having to pay that fee, that was one of the key reasons that the company decided to move in that direction. So
to build on that experience, you mentioned this notion of kind of dealing with a centralized platform, right? They have control, and suddenly they can kick you off, raise the prices. We're seeing that now with Netflix, Amazon.
Yep.
Excuse me. The playbook has been, right, as a platform, you get a big user base and then you start raising prices. Then you extract rents.
Sure.
Right, from the econ academic speak.
Yeah.
What's your view in the decentralized sense? So these games that are popping up now, what makes their business model different than a standard game where you would put into a PlayStation, for example?
Sure. The key difference, I believe, and I think there's a number of different ways to look at it, but the key difference, especially with some of the very successful games like Axie Infinity, et cetera, and the reason that these games have gotten very big very quickly, is that a significant portion of the value of the game is held by the gamers themselves in the form of NFTs and tokens. And that just doesn't happen in the non-blockchain paradigm. So in the traditional gaming paradigm, you either pay 30, 60 bucks to Sony or Microsoft or Epic or whatever, you buy a game and that's it. Or you download a free-to-play game and you either play it for free, or maybe you pay for skins or whatever, et cetera. The money only kind of goes one way, from the gamer to the company. In the case of blockchain games, obviously there is some movement of money from the gamer to the company, but there's also movement of assets or money, or assets, game assets, from gamer to gamer. So gamers can trade NFTs within the game, or they can buy and sell NFTs. And the other thing that, let's say you invest a lot of money and time and energy into a game, a blockchain game, and you decide at some point in the future that I'm done with it, I'm tired of this game. You can sell those NFTs and those tokens, and then choose another game to play. You can't do that in the current paradigm, in the Sony App Store, or Apple App Store paradigm. You can't sell your game to someone else and then go play another game. It doesn't work like that. So
Great. So thank you for sharing that. And in terms of what you mentioned, trying to move from one game to another, if I had to ask you how you define the metaverse, because it sounds like this big amorphous thing where you kind of, enter the matrix or something like that. But really, there are kind of, as you mentioned, a collection of different games out there. Some of them may work with others, right? You might have an NFT that can be moved across different games, but most, I would imagine at this point, don't allow that yet. So how would you define the gaming metaverse or metaverse more broadly? And then we'll dig into gaming a little bit more.
sure. I mean, for me, because I'm a fan of Neil Stephenson, the classic definition of the metaverse is the one that he created in 1992 with his book Snow Crash. So for me, that is the canonical definition of the metaverse. So if you haven't read Snow Crash, I strongly recommend it. I think it's a tremendous book. In terms of the metaverse with respect to gaming and blockchain today, I think we're still at a very early stage. Many people consider the sandbox to be one of the most prominent decentralized metaverse platforms, and we believe that it is too. But I agree, it's still very difficult to move NFTs from one platform to another, just because this whole gaming segment is only 4 or 5 years old. And when you think about sort of the history of gaming, consoles have been around for decades. PC gaming has been around for decades. Even mobile games have been around for well over a decade, probably coming close to 2 decades now. So blockchain gaming with a very short history now of 4 or 5 years, we need more time to fully develop interoperability between games. But it's something that we all want to see, because interoperability increases the value of assets. If you can bring one asset from one game to another, it would increase the value of those assets because there's more utility. And so in that way, many games are incentivized towards that interoperable future.
All right. So as a huge fan of anime, that reminds me of this anime called Sword Art Online, where you kind of had these different games, right? And you could move and port over your skins and characters and even some skills and so on across different games. So that sounds like a really exciting future. From what you have seen, and given your exposure, you're pretty much drinking out of the fire hose as there's new developments coming in. You're viewing so much of this. What do you think are the investment trends for blockchain games and for metaverse more broadly in the next few years?
Sure. So for blockchain games, I think one big trend that we're seeing are guilds. So guilds came out of Axie Infinity, which is still the most prominent blockchain game platform. And essentially what happened was that a group in the Philippines saw that it's very difficult for gamers to get onto the game because the barrier to entry was fairly high. The financial barrier was fairly high. And so they set up a program where people would lend Axies or these NFTs to new gamers until the gamer had played enough, was able to reimburse the rental of that Axie. And so that, in a more formal sense, is what a guild is. So that a guild is like a group of gamers who come together and have tools and services to support those gamers within one game or multiple games. And we're investing in well over 15, 20 guilds around the world. And we're seeing a lot of guild activity in Asia, in Latin America, in Africa even. So that's, I would say, one of the big trends we're seeing in blockchain gaming.
So again, as someone who's spent way more time studying the traditional financial markets, what you describe sounds like these communes or even like church groups where you kind of cross-insure each other and provide financing.
Yes.
Would you summarize guilds as something like that?
Yeah, I think that could be a way to look at it. I mean, it's still very early days, um, but yeah, it's a way for uh, a community to support each other within the confines of a blockchain game or multiple blockchain games. That's correct.
And I like your description that it effectively is this decentralization, right? And then these groups will kind of emerge naturally as people want to get together and share resources. In terms of the areas of development for the metaverse, um, what do you think seems to be more attractive now? And I hesitate a little bit because I'm afraid there's no clear answer, but I'll give you the question anyways. Okay. Is it in terms of metaverse platform building or building tools to pipelines into on ramps and off ramps? Are they the design of NFTs or kind of actually have players contribute to the game by creating new quests and so on? How do you view these different facets of the development of the metaverse ecosystem?
Well, I think it's everything, actually. As I mentioned before, this segment is still very, very young, and everything is still fairly immature. So the tools are immature, the technologies are immature, the protocols are immature. Um, there's, we've identified a number, we've invested in or own multiple of these billion-dollar blockchain games, but there are still dozens and dozens of genres of games where there is no breakout successful blockchain game. So let's say first-person shooter. This is a very popular genre of game. Obviously like Apex or Fortnite. There is no blockchain game, leading blockchain game in that segment, for instance. Or horror games are a big genre. There is no leading blockchain game in that genre of game. So we think there's just so much to do. And so that's why we've done over 150 investments just in 2021 alone. We're trying to identify the next leading games, but also tools, protocols, related services, et cetera.
So given that you mentioned, so much of it still needs building, and you also see a lot of development in these various different facets, could you help us describe your framework to evaluate these startups? What distinguishes a new startup in this space from another? So when you make an investment decisions, what would be the kind of things you would be looking for?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of the classic aspects that I think most investors are looking at. So they're looking at a team, ideally a team that has had success, even if it's in the previous paradigm, the Web 2 paradigm, a team that has success building in the Web 2 paradigm, or a team that has a very strong blockchain or crypto resume. Those are all things that we look for. And then obviously it'd be great to have a very strong game design. It'd be great if the white paper was already written. That sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. If the tokenomics are already developed, that's a very good sign. And then there are some teams that come to us with a demo that's playable. And so that's even better. So all these things are, we invest at many different stages. So sometimes there's a team that already has a game in market and they're looking for, support for, let's say, a token launch or something like that. So it really depends on the team and the level of, where they're at.
I see. And in some of the part of our conversation before, you brought up examples from the Philippines or Africa. And I know you're very involved with the ecosystem here in Asia in particular. So how do you think Asia differs from, places like America or Europe in terms of are there any unique opportunities you've identified, having spent so much of your career in Asia as well as in America?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what do you think? Sorry.
I mean, I would say that Asia has been a lot more open to blockchain games, a lot more welcoming, whether it's from the gamers themselves. There's just been more interest in Asia, or even from a regulatory perspective. I think there's still a lot of barriers to launching blockchain games in, let's say, the US and some other markets. So I would say both on the building a blockchain game business, Asia has been more welcoming or open. And then the user base, the gamers themselves, are also more welcoming or more open to playing blockchain games.
So on that note, though, for example, Europe now has GDPR, right? United States is now thinking of developing some similar laws, but they're kind of behind. China has these data locality rules.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how do you try to navigate this? Because it's such a fast-moving and potentially business model destroying change, right?
It is difficult, but we endeavor to follow the laws in all of the jurisdictions that we operate in, and we have very strong legal guidance, and we follow that guidance to operate legally wherever we're allowed to.
I didn't mean to ask you to guess what the regulation will be in the future, but it just came to mind that Asia still doesn't quite have the same kind of really intense rule as Europe, but one might anticipate that coming. So sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that we want the in general, regulation provides clarity, and so regulation is welcome because it helps us understand what's possible and what's legal. So we welcome it.
So going back to your or the earlier discussion we had about centralization versus decentralization, you pushed this idea that decentralization is a good framework to have, right? And do you have a perspective also on permission versus permissionless blockchain approaches?
It's a good question. I would say that what we've seen with respect to centralization and decentralization, we definitely agree that decentralized future is the one that we want. We've seen how centralized platforms have really monopolized users and data, in the past decade or two. So that provides a very clear example of the dangers of centralization. In terms of permission, I think it's still yet to be determined. Oops, excuse me. Turn off my alarm. But yeah, I would say I don't have as clear of an opinion on that topic.
See, because that leads me to the other follow-up that I would like to ask, because there's now this notion, even in Europe, there's this notion of open banking, right? This stance that customers own the data. And I can imagine, your stance sounds like it's similar in that we want decentralization. We don't want your data to be monopolized, right, by one particular entity that could then extract rents from it. And so perhaps we have this idea, right, that the players or whoever is participating will actually retain some ownership, and the tokenization is a way you can actually monetize your experience, right, and some of these things. In terms of your set of portfolio companies, you mentioned a whole 150 of them. That's a lot of companies to keep an eye on. So how do you and your team provide support and for the portfolio companies and grow the community?
Certainly. It is a large number, and so we do struggle at times. But essentially, when any of our invested companies have issues, are struggling, we're always there to help if we can, make introductions if we can, help them find investors, find people who can solve, problems that they might have, and that sort of thing. We also do a lot of introductions between our invested companies. So a company that we might have invested in last year will see an announcement about a new company that we've recently invested in, and they ask for an introduction. And because they're both invested in by us, there's a level of trust that is created from that. So essentially, that's kind of how we work.
Again, have you ever had a situation where there might be some conflicts of interest among the portfolio companies, or either they're competing or they're kind of having very opposite approaches to trying to approach this metaverse? And how do you navigate that? I mean, do you come down to make a decision, or you kind of wait it out and let the market solve it?
No, I mean, we have invested in multiple projects that might be competitive, but we've always we always disclose our investments up front, and companies are, in general, at least in our case, are eager to be invested in by us, even if there might be a competitor that we've also invested in, just because this segment is still very, very young. It's still a relatively immature segment. And so there's still a lot of opportunity. There could be multiple, X type of game, and there might be the play style might be very different, or the graphic, experience might be very different, or, there are multiple games in the Web 2 space, in the current paradigm that are, driving games. There's multiple driving games. There's multiple. And so, we think that there will be multiple opportunities for different, competitive projects, even in the Web3 space.
So for some of our listeners who might be involved with setting up some of these startups and thinking about starting a new company, trying to enter this space, could you share a bit on the timeline or the pipeline? Because you'll try to come up and get a user base. What happens if you fail? Do you typically then leave and try again, or do you get absorbed by another entity? What are the kind of strategies that young companies might take?
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, it's building a blockchain business is fairly similar to a non-blockchain business. I would say the one exception, at least in a blockchain game, is the tokenomics. If you don't get the tokenomics of the game right, you can really cripple the economic engine of that game. And so that's an aspect where you really do need to bring in an expert if you don't understand how to build a solid tokenomics model for your blockchain game. Other than that, I would say the other aspects of building a blockchain game are fairly similar to building a non-blockchain game. But the tokenomics model and getting that right, and getting that aspect is fairly unique, and it's something that you can't really change later, so to speak, easily at least.
So again, thank you very much for the insights you've shared. It's been a real pleasure. I know we've had a time run out a couple seconds ago, so I won't hold up our listeners. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ben.